What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, December 11th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. One of these days, I will know what day of the week it is before I start talking, but today wasn't that day. Two-game NBA slate again tonight. NBA Cup games once again. Hawks taking on the Knicks in New York. Golden State taking on Houston in Houston. We have Q tags, relevant, legitimate Q tags for every single team on this slate. So probably even more so than usual. Keep in mind that exposures and everything on this show should more or less be taken with a grain of salt because they're always going to change between now and lock anyway as ownership updates and all of that. But you have four teams out of four that have questionable players. Maybe they all play. I projected them all to play for now, but decent chance you end up getting someone ruled out somewhere. So obviously all that stuff can change. I will do my best as I go through to talk about what I think the ramifications of different injury situations are. So starting with Atlanta, we have Jalen Johnson questionable, which is obviously really, really big. Bogdanovic is questionable as well. Trae Young and DeAndre Hunter are both probable. You also have some G League guys that are questionable that don't matter. But Jalen Johnson, obviously really big. If he were to sit, I assume that you get DeAndre Hunter in the starting lineup. Hunter's already been playing like 28, 29 minutes off the bench. Probably plays more if Johnson is out. You probably also get more playing time for Scherer if Johnson is out. He typically has been starting, but only playing like 20 to 22 minutes. He would probably play a bit more if Jalen Johnson is out. If Bogdanovic is in, he probably plays a little bit more if Jalen Johnson is out as well. If Bogdanovic is out, you probably get a little bit more playing time for Krejci, who has been the backup point guard the last couple of games behind Trae Young. But in their most recent game where they were more shorthanded, he played some minutes alongside Young as well. You would probably also, again, get more minutes from Scherer, Dyson Daniels, probably DeAndre Hunter. So both of those guys do have pretty significant implications if they are out. But for now, assuming that they are in, the field is getting to pretty much like 10 to 30% of most or all of the relevant guys here. I am kind of similar, except getting to a lot more Bogdanovic right now, showing up in 59% of my lineups, only projected for 27% ownership. He's only $4,900. He has shooting guard and small forward eligibility, which is really nice. And this just is a spot where I think you could see him play a little bit more. I projected him for 27 minutes. If you go look at the last three games he played, he missed Atlanta's most recent game. But prior to that, 29 minutes, 26 minutes, 25 minutes. This is somebody that is live to close games. When you think about their closing lineup, you're pretty much never going to have Scherer in there. Typically, it's been DeAndre Hunter in his place, but you can also potentially get, Bogdanovic in place of Dyson Daniels, for example, especially if like the Hawks are playing from behind. You don't need Dyson Daniels' defense as much. You want Bogdanovic out there more for his offense. So there are ways for him to get into the closing lineup, but also with this just being a game that matters, you are pretty likely to get just a little bit more condensed rotations, and you can pick up an extra minute or two that way for Bogdanovic as well. So I do like him a lot. My biggest concern really with how much of him I'm getting to right now is that we do have all of these Q tags in the 9:30 game. And the more, it goes without saying, but the more exposure you have to this early game, the less flexibility that you're going to have to swap for potential news in Golden State, Houston. And not only is there injury news there is starting lineup news as well, because I will be the first to admit I have no idea who Steve Kerr is starting in this game, much less whether or not Andrew Wiggins is playing. So, I think Wiggins is going to play, but I don't know, and I don't know who they're starting, even if he does play. So there are a lot of ways that you can kind of have unexpected news in this late game you want to swap around. That being said, I do factor that in when I make lineups. I have a little bit of a penalty for the earlier games. So I'm still getting to a lot of Bogdanovic. I think he looks really good one way or the other at only 27% projected ownership. Just looks good, easy to fit into lineups. And one thing that I think is probably making him look pretty good too is that one of the teams on this slate is the Knicks, who we know run a very, very tight rotation. You're not going to get a lot of like good mid-range plays from them. So it kind of limits, I think, the options in this price range too, which makes Bogdanovich look a little bit better. There's also the potential path. This is something I didn't hit on with the Magic yesterday, and I regretted it. I projected their rotation deeper than they ended up playing. So I wanted on this show to at least mention, if the team really cut down the rotation, what would they end up doing? The obvious thing for Atlanta here would be that they cut Krejci out or really limit Krejci's minutes, and Bogdan becomes the backup point guard, in which case he plays 30 or something like that. I don't think that's the most likely case. I think Krejci plays most of the backup minutes behind Trae Young. Bogdanovich maybe gets a couple. But that is, one potential change that they could make with it being an NBA Cup game that would just boost Bogdan's value even more. Trae Young getting 24% ownership at 9,400, showing up in 27% of my lineups. I actually have him with the highest play type adjustment on this slate as well. We know that, it's a Tom Thibodeau coach team. Generally, they play pretty well defensively. Overall, this season, they are in the top 10. Or sorry, I had that sorted wrong. They are middle of the pack, 15th in adjusted defensive rating. But Trae Young, another very heavy pick and roll guy. His pick and roll percentage is about 44% so far this season. The Knicks have actually been a favorable matchup in that regard. So it does set up as a little bit of a positive matchup for Trae Young in the numbers that I look at from a play type standpoint. He's only 9,400, and he's somebody, too, that I think is pretty likely to just play an extra couple of minutes in this game. I talked about it yesterday with the Oklahoma City guys. One reason that I thought they looked so good was because their salaries for the top-end guys like Shea are just a little bit lower than they would be if, Shea played on a different team. Because, a lot of times you get the top-end guys that they're just playing 37 minutes every night, and so you can't really go that much higher than them in a game like this. Somebody like Trae Young that on average is playing 34, 35 minutes, there's more room to elevate his minutes without going crazy and saying, oh, I think he plays 42 minutes, which he could. But even just projecting him for 37 or 38 minutes, I went to 37, is going to just make him look good at 9,400 because basically he's priced to play 34 or 35 minutes because that's what he normally does. So it makes him look pretty good here. Jalen Johnson getting right around the field on him as well. $8,300 price tag is fine. His playing time is down a little bit compared to what it was earlier in the year when you were dealing with injuries to DeAndre Hunter and Bogdanovich, but should still play 36, 37 minutes in this game. I projected 36, but it certainly could go higher than that. Onyeka Okongwu, even with the field on him at 4,700, lately he's been the guy kind of on the winning end of the split, the timeshare with Clint Capella, but there's not really much rhyme or reason to it. On a game-to-game basis, I think one is pretty much just as likely as the other to play more minutes. I projected Okongwu for an extra minute compared to Capella, but from a range of outcome standpoint, they are very similar. Okongwu is just $1,000 less expensive than Capella and getting similar ownership, which I think is interesting. You can see here that I have Capella projected a few points higher, 2.5 points higher, but he is more expensive, similar ownership. So I am getting more Okongwu than Capella, but Capella does certainly have a nice ceiling here as well. If he plays well, you are more likely to get more minutes too, which is always nice. DeAndre Hunter right around the field on him at 5,800, frequently closing games, probably playing 28 or 29 minutes in this one. And then Reese Shea is a spot that I'm not really getting to. 13% projected ownership, $4,300 price tag. If Jalen Johnson and Bogdanovich are in, it's just a really tough sell for me to want to get to Reese Shea at that salary. Not that it's super expensive, but it just becomes really difficult to see where he's going to be getting his minutes from in an NBA Cup game because we've seen, on average, him playing in the low 20s, but it's really unlikely in this game that he's getting minutes, closing minutes over DeAndre Hunter or Bogdanovich or Jalen Johnson. So I projected 21 minutes. It's tough to get there. One thing that I will say is that I seem to be a little bit higher on $3,300 Gary Payton than the industry, not by a huge margin in terms of minutes or projection, but by a little bit. So that may have something to do with this, where I'm just preferring $3,300 Gary Payton to $4,300 Reese Shea. But I also only went 19 minutes on Payton, so it's not like I went crazy there. And I think, it all makes sense. It's just difficult, I think, to see where extra minutes come from for Reese Shea. He's a good enough point per minute guy at 0.88 DraftKings points per minute, but it's not like he's one of these 1.1 fantasy point per minute guys where if he just plays 2 minutes more than I'm projecting, he looks way different than if he plays his median. He, really, I think to be somebody that I really want at 4,300, probably needs to be playing 24, 25, 26 minutes. And I don't really know how that happens unless at least one of those questionable guys are out. The other, I guess, possibility is what if Krejci is just completely removed from the rotation? In that case, Bogdanovic becomes the backup point guard, and that maybe opens the door for Shea to play mid-20s in minutes if Atlanta really condenses their rotation that way. I would say that there is a non-zero chance that happens, but it's not what I expect. So I guess that would, if those guys are in, that would be the one path, I think, to Shea playing enough minutes where I would really like him at this price. But I think you kind of have to project Krejci to not play at all or play one rotation, which again in this game is possible, but Atlanta hasn't really done anything to suggest that Shea's at a point that they want to play him a lot of minutes so far. So I am fine not getting too much of him at that price tag. Clearly, I don't think it's a horrible play or anything. He projects for 18 DraftKings points. There is some volatility in his playing time, but he's not really showing up for me. Dyson Daniels getting 14% ownership. I didn't get to him either, which is kind of surprising because he's somebody that I think I've been getting more than the field for a lot of the season, but he's just pretty expensive at 6,800. I projected him for 34 minutes. Again, he could play a little bit more. He's somebody that maybe picks up an extra minute or two if they take minutes away from Krejci. That could certainly happen. He also could pick up more minutes in place of Shea. If Shea, instead of playing 21 minutes, plays 18, then suddenly you have 36 minutes available for Dyson Daniels. So there are ways for him to get more minutes, but he is also pretty expensive already at 6,800. He is good at racking up defensive stats. He's averaging 4.3 steals per 100 possessions, 1.2 blocks per 100 possessions. So stuff like that is always nice because he's not scoring dependent. He's playing the bulk of his minutes with Trae Young and with Jalen Johnson. So it does help that he produces fantasy points without being relied on to score. But it's just somebody that's not really showing up for me. But I do think he plays pretty healthy minutes. There's just other guys in that price range that I think look a little bit better. Somebody, big BG3 said, doesn't Trae always go off in New York? I don't know if he always goes off. I know that there's the narrative of Madison Square Garden fans hating him and making him the villain. I honestly, off the top of my head, don't know how he's done in New York. It's not something that I would look at or care about other than just from an entertainment standpoint. But I do know there is the whole they hate him in New York narrative. On the other side for the Knicks, we have Josh Hart questionable, which is obviously massive. Karl Anthony Towns is probable, and then nobody relevant is out. At least not yet. If Josh Hart is out, clearly that opens up a lot of minutes. It opens up minutes for McBride. It probably opens up a little bit more run for Cameron Payne alongside Brunson. It also opens up minutes for Precious Achiuwa. That's the one thing that I really want to point out is that Precious Achiuwa will play minutes alongside Karl Anthony Towns. So for most of this season with the Knicks, if you got Josh Hart ruled out, it would be as simple as saying you get more minutes for Cameron Payne, you get a lot more minutes for Miles McBride, and then maybe they give 6 minutes to Dadier or Kolek or something off the bench. Now with Precious Achiuwa back, I think Precious Achiuwa, if Hart were to be out, is probably playing mid-20s in minutes. I think that you would get Achiuwa might start, or you would get McBride starting, one of the two. But then I think that you would just still get this really condensed rotation where McBride and Achiuwa both pick up minutes in addition to Brunson and Bridges and Anunoby playing a bunch more. Cat would play more also. So that is something that it's a little bit different. We've seen up until Achiuwa came back, the Knicks just had a straight backup center behind Cat. They didn't have anybody playing the 3 or the 4 and the 5. Precious Achiuwa will do both. So don't sleep on Precious Achiuwa if Josh Hart gets ruled out here. I have Hart projected in for right now. Jalen Brunson showing up in 66% of my lineups, 49% projected ownership. And he's basically very similar to what I was saying about Trae Young, where while the Knicks play a ton of minutes in general, Brunson does on average play less than the other starters here. And so as a result, he's $8,500 when if he averaged 37, 38, 39 minutes per game, he'd be, a $9,500 guy or somebody in that range. I projected 36 or 37 minutes to him here, which is just like I was saying with Trae Young, a couple minutes higher than what he is priced to play, what he plays during the regular season. So that just makes him look really good at that price. And then he also is somebody that I have right behind Trae Young in terms of the matchup from a play type standpoint. He, so far this season, if I can find him in my sheet, there he is. So he's ahead of Trae Young. 39% frequency in the pick and roll. Looking at defensive stats for the pick and roll, I hadn't pulled these up before, but I mentioned it with Trae Young. The Knicks are allowing the most field goal attempts per game to pick and roll ball handlers. They rank in the 37th or 38th percentile in points per possession. The Hawks are allowing the most points per possession to pick and roll ball handlers. They are allowing the third most pick and roll possessions per game. So both of these teams, and more so for Jalen Brunson, both of these teams are teams that don't defend the pick and roll particularly well, and they do not limit the opposing team's usage in the pick and roll very well either. Trae Young, the Knicks do a little bit better job of it than the Hawks do. Trae Young is a little bit higher frequency pick and roll guy than Jalen Brunson, but both of these guys very active in the pick and roll. Both of them look good from a play type standpoint in this matchup. So that is getting a little bit of a bump for me as well in the way that I project them outside of just looking at the team total and all of that. So it makes him look even a little bit better. Karl-Anthony Towns getting a bunch of ownership at 48%. I'm getting to 24. He's the highest projected guy on the slate for me. I think he's the highest projected guy on the slate for probably everybody. I don't know who would really be higher unless like it's Trae Young maybe. I think he looks good. My concern here is Precious Achiuwa because I still projected 36 minutes to Cat, but it becomes kind of tough to give Cat like 38 or 39 minutes with Achiuwa back because it's more difficult to just not give Precious Achiuwa minutes than it is to not give Jericho Sims minutes. Like when it's Jericho Sims backing you up, no disrespect to Jericho Sims, sure he's a great guy, but Cat can just play 40 plus minutes and nobody cares. Now with Achiuwa back, it's a little bit more difficult to project those minutes. I still think he probably plays 36 or 37, and it's not completely off the table that he just goes and plays 40, but it is less likely the better your backup is, which, you know, Achiuwa is just a better player than Jericho Sims. So I went 36 or 37 minutes on Cat. Still projects very well, but he is taking up a center spot on a slate where you do have alternatives, Alperen Şengün obviously being the primary one. But also he's relatively expensive. So if you go that route, you are kind of being funneled into some of the same cheap plays that other people are using. Whereas if you go a little bit more balanced, you can just kind of avoid those Risache type plays, for example. So if you build a lineup you like with Cat, clearly good play. But right now, at least at that ownership, I don't like him as much. I do like Jalen Brunson a lot at that similar ownership for $1,200 less. Getting to tons of OG Anunoby. I should have led with him, but he's showing up in 79% of my lineups. He's only $6,200. His playing time has been up recently. We've kind of seen a ton of playing time in general for all three of Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and Anunoby throughout the season. But lately, we've seen Anunoby's playing time look really good. 41 minutes last game, 39 the game before that, 39 the game before that, averaging 37 minutes per game over his last 10, 39.7 over those last three. So I projected him for 39 minutes here in a game that we know the Knicks care about. If Achiuwa weren't back, I probably would have projected north of 40. But again, the fact that Achiuwa will play a few minutes alongside Cat, and you have McBride healthy too, kept me at 39 there. I went to 40 minutes for Mikal Bridges. He is typically the guy that plays the most here, though we have seen that fluctuate throughout the season. I went 38 to Hart. His playing time has been down a little bit more recently, and then also he does have the Q tag, so obviously not playing at 100% either. But I expect 38 to 40 minutes as a median for all three of Anunoby, Bridges, and Hart. Anunoby, I think, just kind of looks the best because he is $900 less expensive than Hart. He's only $200 more than Bridges. Obviously, Bridges has not been the best fantasy producer so far this season. Probably will improve going forward. But overall, 0.89 DraftKings points per minute for Anunoby this year, 0.78 for Bridges, 0.97 for Hart. So you're getting a big enough salary discount between Hart and Anunoby that I prefer Anunoby. And then he's just been a better fantasy producer so far than Bridges at basically the same price. Still like Bridges too, getting the 56% of him at 35% owned. So I like both of those guys. Josh Hart, I'm right in line with the field at 7,100. So, he's the most difficult to get to because he is the most expensive of the three, but still should play a bunch of minutes. Already talked about Towns. A little bit under the field on McBride here, but still getting to 22% at 4,100, projected for 35% ownership. I projected him for 25 minutes. I do think there is some volatility there where potentially he could play a little bit more. I gave 16 total minutes to Precious Achiuwa, with 4 of those minutes coming alongside Cat. Maybe Achiuwa is just the backup at center. I don't think that's the case, but maybe he is, in which case McBride plays more. There is also the possibility, like I was talking about with the Hawks, where I didn't project it that way, but if I had to like pick one guy that they just cut out of their rotation or really limit, it would be Krejci. For the Knicks, it would be Payne. Like you could, it wouldn't be crazy. I don't think it's going to happen, but it wouldn't be crazy if McBride were the backup point guard, and then what ends up happening is McBride plays 28 minutes, Achiuwa plays like 24 minutes, and Payne's just not in the rotation. Something along those lines that could happen, but it's not how I projected it. I went like 10 minutes to Payne, 36 or 37 to Brunson, and then minutes to the other normal guys there. So I still think McBride's a pretty good value. I just didn't get quite as much as the field. And then the same goes for Achiuwa at 3,600. Only 13% ownership. I do think that's a pretty interesting price tag because if Cat gets in foul trouble, Achiuwa plays more. If like any of the wings get in foul trouble, Achiuwa probably plays at least a little bit more. So I do think he kind of has that contingent upside where it's not just the normal backup center thing. Like with Okongwu and Capella, if one of them gets in foul trouble, the other one is just playing more minutes, just like we were talking about last night with Wagner and Goga. And then you actually did see him play alongside Goga too. So, he benefited when Carter picked up his third foul, for example, picked up, Wagner sub back in for a little bit, like the last minute of the first half. Achiuwa does have that sort of upside. So I would actually kind of like to have a little bit more of him than I do right now. But I projected 16 minutes. I think that's pretty much in line with what I've seen elsewhere too. There is just a lot of volatility in that too, just because he can play multiple positions. So definitely an interesting play at modest ownership at 3,600. If I had to choose, like if in 150 lineups, if I hadn't run everything, you just asked me if I wanted more or less than 13% Achiuwa, I probably would have said more just to embrace that volatility. So wouldn't be upset if I got a little bit more later on, but certainly not trying to talk anyone off of him, even though I don't have a lot there. So the Knicks are basically what they've been, with the exception of figuring out how Achiuwa fits into that rotation. Now, before I move on to the Golden State and Houston game, reminder to sign up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. Our next monthly roundtable is tomorrow night at 9 or 9:30, sometime after NFL kicks off. That is the show that we do once a month, taking subscriber questions. The 4 of us, Utical, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, and myself, answer your questions, give all of our thoughts, which I think makes for a really interesting show. Probably one of the more valuable things that you'll come across content-wise, because we all approach DFS differently. We all have different ideas that we've had success with. So I know I learn a lot during those shows. I usually come away with some sort of idea of something that I want to try and implement into my game, something that I think I can improve on. In a lot of cases, it's something that I hadn't even thought of until someone asks the question or somebody mentions it in their reply. But we all approach things really differently. So you get a lot of different ideas. And I think a lot of times, you just hear one idea phrased a certain way from one person, and it really clicks and makes a lot of sense. So I really love that show. Our next one is tomorrow. And if you sign up now, I'm not guaranteeing it, but there is a decent chance you end up squeezing 2 of those in on your month, because usually we do them the first week of the month. We didn't this month, so no guarantee, but decent chance that you're able to grab 2 of those within a month if you sign up now, assuming that we get back to our normal timing in January. So definitely check that out. Also, in addition to that, if you weren't already aware, that is the site where we have evergreen strategy videos up, DFS strategy stuff, from everything from nerdy using toy games to demonstrate how you should be approaching the relationship between, for example, projections and ownership in DFS. Nerdy doing a lot of stuff for battle royale drafts on Underdog. Brick talking about how to create your own projections, ownership, actual projections, all of that. Yuta and I have both talked a lot about our respective processes. I have shown exactly how I use SaberSim. I'm not, like a lot of you, I'm not somebody that has the ability to code and program all of my own stuff. So I'm still relying on publicly available stuff. We talk a lot about how to maximize that. Still, hopefully be able to lower your subscription costs across all of these sites and maximize the ones that you do sign up for. I've shown exactly how I use SaberSim within my process. Yuta and I did a video together talking about exactly what we look at for NBA, stuff that we think gives us an edge that isn't being utilized by everybody. So a lot of that kind of stuff, in addition to a really good Discord, a lot of good players in there as well, just talking strategy and helping each other out, coming up with ideas and stuff like that. I think it's a really valuable place to be. That link is in the description below. Now, moving on to Golden State and Houston. I mentioned it before, but Andrew Wiggins is questionable for Golden State. I have him projected in for now. D'Anthony Melton, of course, is out for the season. Moses Moody is also out, which does matter just in the sense that we know that Steve Kerr loves to play everybody he possibly can. Can't play Moody tonight, so that does, by definition, just shorten their rotation. Also, in their last game, they just played a little bit shorter rotation than normal. And then tonight, you do have the NBA Cup game, so I didn't project it as deep as I would normally. Like, I didn't give any minutes to whichever Spencer is on this team. Pat Spencer, I'll say Cam is on Memphis, but I didn't give any minutes to Pat Spencer, for example. So I do think you get a little bit shorter Golden State rotation with or without Wiggins. If Wiggins is in, obviously matters, though. Now, I don't know what the starting lineup will be either. Obviously, Curry is starting. Wiggins, if he's in, is obviously starting. A couple of games ago, we got Draymond Green coming back and coming off the bench. He was still closing, but he was coming off the bench. Kerr said that he anticipated using Green off the bench for like the foreseeable future. And then immediately last game moves Green back into the starting lineup. That could have been because Wiggins was out, but they also moved Hield into the starting lineup. So I don't, they took Podziemski out of the starting lineup. They moved Green in place of Looney, and then they moved Hield in place of Wiggins. So I don't know what they're going to do. I projected the starting lineup to be Curry, Payton, Wiggins, Kuminga, and Green. I don't know what they're going to do. So this is what I was mentioning before, where even if all of the questionable guys end up being ruled in, there is the potential to be swapping around with Golden State news because it's pretty wide open there. They could go back to Looney as the starter with Green off the bench if Wiggins is in. If Wiggins is out, they can start pretty much anybody. So there's a lot of different ways that this can go. But with the way that I projected it, Kuminga's showing up a ton for me. 5,400 is just a good price tag, good point per minute guy. I projected him for 30 minutes, assuming that he starts. Probably plays more if Wiggins is out, but if Wiggins is in, I still think you're probably getting around 30 minutes. Kyle Anderson hasn't really been a big part of the rotation for a while. You are missing Moody, which is nice. So Kuminga looks really good. He's popular. He's getting the most ownership on the team, but I'm getting to him a lot as well. Kevon Looney getting 32% ownership, which is what I'm getting also. I only projected him for 20 minutes off the bench. He's $4,000. He just, it's a 2-game slate. You don't have a ton of value. Now, one concern here would be that Houston doesn't necessarily play big for their bench unit. We've seen Steven Adams playing more minutes lately, but that's because Tari Eason's been out. You have Tari Eason back now, so I think that there's a good chance you only get like 8 minutes off the bench for Steven Adams. So there is some chance that you see Golden State go smaller here, and as a result, Looney only plays like 16 minutes or something, 15, 16 minutes, and you get more of Hield, Payton, Podziemski, whoever, Waters. So that is a risk, but at 4K, I think Looney still looks decent here. Buddy Hield getting 30% ownership. I only have 12. This goes back to just projecting the starting lineup. I think that the industry is a bit higher on Hield's minutes. I went to 24, which if he comes off the bench is as high as I would want to go because typically he's playing like 21 to 22 off the bench, but this is a game that matters. I do think they run a little bit shorter rotation. If he starts, he's probably playing like 28, 30 minutes somewhere in there. At 4,500, then he looks really, really good. So whether or not he starts definitely matters. I'm not projecting him to start right now, which is why I'm not getting too much of him. And also it's why I'm getting to a lot of Gary Payton. I still only projected 19 minutes for Payton if he does start. But if Payton starts and Wiggins is in, I don't think Payton plays a ton, but I think he plays enough to still be a good value at 3,300. He's not a bad point per minute guy, like 0.85 fantasy points per minute since the start of last year, 0.9 this year. He doesn't really need to shoot to produce fantasy points. He gets a bunch of defensive stats. He gets some rebounds. He gets some assists. So he's somebody that's nice. He's nice because if you plug him into the starting lineup, he doesn't need a lot of usage. So I think he's a good value if he starts. If he comes off the bench, still has the potential to be a good value, but obviously a lot riskier because the minutes really, really become volatile there. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. Draymond, 6,700 projected for 17% ownership. I didn't get to any. Same kind of thing as Dyson Daniels, really. I think it's just kind of that price range is somewhat difficult for me to get to. It seems like I'm really prioritizing either guys that are like 8K plus or 5,500 or less, basically. And so it's kind of just like squeezing out Draymond and Daniels, for example. But if you build lineups that you like with Draymond, fine. Tank said any chance Green comes off the bench? Yes. Decent chance he comes off the bench. Kerr said like 2 games ago he wants him to come off the bench and then moved him into the starting lineup. Steve Kerr lies constantly if you're new to paying attention to Steve Kerr. So nothing he says matters until you see a starting lineup. But yeah, there's the only people that I am confident 100% start for the Warriors tonight are Stephen Curry and, if he's active, Andrew Wiggins. That is the entire list of guys that I am sure are starting for Golden State. So yeah, Draymond could come off the bench. One thing I will say about him coming off the bench, you shouldn't lower his minutes that much if he comes off the bench. If he comes off the bench, he is still closing the game like 9 times out of 10. He's probably playing like 28 minutes off the bench. If he starts, he's probably playing like 30. So you would prefer him to start, but it's not a huge downgrade. So do pay attention to that. If he does come off the bench and you see his ownership go from like 18% to like 8%, then he actually probably becomes a really good play. So do keep that in mind. Steph Curry, if you can get to him, great. But I think that Trey probably plays a couple more minutes. I think that Brunson plays more minutes at a cheaper price tag. So it becomes difficult to get to Steph when those guys are a little bit cheaper. Andrew Wiggins at 6,600 looks fine. Again, kind of a tough price tag for me to get to, but he is still showing up 11% of the time for me. Lindy Waters, no ownership at 3,500. I don't want much of him, but he is somebody that if he gets hot, can play his way into more minutes. And then also, like I was saying with Kevon Looney, if you were to get some smaller lineups from Golden State, that would potentially benefit Lindy Waters. So nothing I want to go crazy on. As you can see, I have like 1%, but at 3,500, there is at least the path to him doing well. Whereas for the most part, there's not really like $3,500 guys that aren't owned on a 2-game slate that have any sort of path. So worth pointing out. Podziemski came off the bench last game. He's 4,800. I projected him for 22 minutes. He didn't get into lineups for me, but again, if he plays well, he can play more. We don't know what the closing lineup is either. The only thing that I can confidently say about the closing lineup is that it has Curry, it probably has Wiggins, it probably has Green, and then the last 2 spots are probably whoever hasn't pissed Steve Kerr off out of Kuminga, Hield, Podziemski, Payton, basically. And some of that will depend on score, too. Like, if they're playing from ahead, there's a better chance Gary Payton's in there. If they're playing from behind, there's a better chance that you're getting, like, Buddy Hield in there. So, it's a really volatile rotation as far as not only who actually starts this game, but who's closing this game as well. And that makes the minutes volatile, too. That being said, I didn't get to Podziemski. Finally, on the Houston side, Q-tag on Alperen Şengün, which obviously matters a lot. Q-tag on Steven Adams, which matters a lot less. Q-tags on Jayshawn Tate and Cam Whitmore, which matter not at all. Tari Eason, not on the injury report. He's missed their last couple of games. Getting him back is a big change in the rotation and also gives us another guy around 5K that we can look to roster. So starting at the top, I am getting to a lot of Jabari Smith here. 5,300 is just a really cheap price tag for him. He's been playing a lot of minutes lately, and you can't attribute all of it to Tari Eason being out. The last couple of games, of course, Eason was out. It does make it easier for Jabari Smith to play more minutes. But the thing that I think is really interesting and important to note is that what actually happened with Eason being out is that Steven Adams played more minutes as the backup center instead of playing limited minutes as the backup center, and then Jabari Smith getting minutes at the backup 5. Jabari Smith basically lost his minutes at the backup 5, but then just played more of them at the 4. It wasn't that he just played a bunch more minutes because Eason was out. He just played them in a different position. The last 2 games that Eason played, where Eason played 24 and 25 minutes, Smith played 40 minutes, Smith played 36 minutes. Steven Adams played 4 and 12, respectively, in those games. So it was kind of a positional difference. But 34.5 minutes per game over his last 5 for Jabari Smith, 35.5 over his last 3. I projected 34 here, which certainly could be low. This is a spot against Golden State where assuming Şengün is in, I do think that you're probably getting that like 8-minute game or whatever from Steven Adams or Landale if Adams is out. And then Smith getting some backup center minutes. There's no reason that he can't against this Golden State front court. And then getting a bunch of minutes at the 4 as well. So I think he looks really good at 5,300. The playing time's been really good. And the salary just really hasn't adjusted very quickly. So I like Jabari Smith a lot. He's another reason why probably I am having trouble getting to like Draymond and Dyson Daniels, for example, because I think that Jabari Smith looks very similar at a cheaper price tag and not that much more ownership. My projection compared to Draymond, I have him like 2 points lower, a little less than 2 points lower than Draymond, but for $1,400 less or something like that, and not that much more ownership, like 26 compared to 16%. He's just going to be a bigger priority. Şengün at 9,200, I think looks very good as well. It looks like I am kind of flip-flopping him and Cat, which strategically I really like. 48 fantasy point projection on Şengün for me, 52.5 on Cat. So basically I have Cat projected 4 points higher than Şengün at $500 more. Cat's probably the guy that I would look to get into like a cash lineup or something. But from a range of outcome standpoint, Şengün is going to beat Cat more than 1 in 3 times or whatever. Like if you give me 2 to 1, I'm taking Şengün. So I think it's pretty interesting, and I like that. I'm basically playing Karl Anthony Towns at the same rate the field is projected to play Cat, and I'm playing Şengün at a very similar rate. I'm playing Towns at the same rate the field projected to play Şengün, and I'm playing Şengün at a very similar rate to the ownership projection for Cat. That's just a very easy, flip-flop that I think makes a lot of sense. If you were to see those ownership numbers condense a little bit, and it's like 40% Cat, 32% Şengün or something, then I would probably correct to where I'm playing Cat close to the field and I'm playing Şengün close to the field, because I think that's more in line with how it should be, as opposed to this like 2 to 1 gap between them. So I do like Şengün a lot if he is able to go. Obviously, a very, very good point per minute guy. One other thing that I forgot to mention on the Knicks, or in the Knicks game, but specifically to Cat, I mentioned Young and Brunson both looking very good. I do have it as a pretty difficult play type matchup for Karl Anthony Towns. So that had a little bit, has a little bit of an impact there as well. That being said, he does still project as the highest scoring guy on the slate for me. Jalen Green, I think it's a tough matchup for him too, but I'm still getting to him about 35% of the time. It's just a really good price at 6,500. I have him projected for 36 minutes. He's been playing a lot of minutes lately, and in this, in an NBA Cup game, I expect him to play a lot. I think that Reed Sheppard is probably the guy that gets squeezed in this rotation. I don't expect Aaron Holiday will be in the rotation, so I projected Sheppard to play like 8 or 9 minutes, and then just a lot of minutes for the main pieces here, including Jalen Green. So even though I don't love the matchup for him, and obviously he is a streaky scorer, I still think it's a really good price tag. I think it's a tough matchup for Van Vliet as well from a play type standpoint. I have him and Green with the 2 most difficult matchups there, but also Van Vliet probably playing 37, 38 minutes at 7,300 is going to look pretty good. I do have a little bit less than the field, but it's pretty good value for his expected playing time. Dylan Brooks is a good value at 4,400, getting about 21% there. Tari Eason is interesting to me because I think he's a pretty good value at 5,200, but he's getting more ownership than Jabari Smith right now, which I have a really difficult time explaining. You can see on the screen that I have Jabari Smith projected for like 1 to 2 fantasy points more than Tari Eason. Eason's a very good point per minute guy. 1.18 DraftKings points per minute is actually the second highest on the team behind Alperen Şengün. It's just a matter of playing time for him. But I projected him for 24 minutes, which is a minute or 2 higher than his season average. He is somebody that he might be the most sensitive guy on the Rockets to score, in the sense that in non-competitive games, he really loses minutes. But in competitive games, he's live to close. So there is the potential for him to play like 26, 27 minutes. But I don't really understand the ownership here. Like I went 34 minutes to Smith. I went 10 minutes more to Jabari Smith than Eason. I think that there is the potential for either of them to play more minutes than I projected. So I don't think it's a case where like I projected Smith's ceiling and Eason's median or anything like that. So if this ownership doesn't change, I would just like to be getting a lot of Jabari Smith and less Eason if it costs me some Eason. But outside of the whole Jabari Smith thing, I do think Eason looks fine. Amen Thompson, 6,300. I projected for 27 minutes. He's getting 20% ownership. I only got to 4%. 6,300 is just tough for somebody that I expect to play, 27, 28 minutes, but that is coming off the bench, is getting some ownership. So kind of tough for me to get to him, but obviously he does have a path to closing. He does have a path to playing a bunch of minutes. He's somebody where if you get an injury mid-game or foul trouble, he is likely to play a bunch more as well. But it's just tough for me to get there when I expect similar playing time from guys like DeAndre Hunter, Bogdan Bogdanovic for less, Jabari Smith for less at not that much more ownership. I have them projected almost identically, and Jabari Smith's $1,000 cheaper, and the ownership is similar. So maybe ownership just ends up being higher on Jabari Smith, and then my exposures to him come down, and my exposures to like Eason and Thompson increase. But right now, I just think the field is projected to make a bigger mistake on Jabari Smith than they are on Eason or Thompson. If anything, I think they're making a mistake in the opposite direction on Eason and Thompson. So that's kind of what's driving all of that here. As far as other players, there's nobody on Houston projected for ownership that I'm not getting to. Reed Shepard, 3,100. Like I mentioned, I expect to barely be in the rotation. Same goes for $3,400 Steven Adams. Somebody said, Alex said, if Şengün is in, what about Looney? So like I projected 20 minutes to Looney off the bench. I got 32%, which is in line with the field. If Looney starts, he probably goes to like 22 to 24 minutes from a projection standpoint. It's just really difficult to answer without even knowing who is in for Golden or what Golden State's lineup is going to be, whether he jumps back ahead of Draymond with Wiggins back or not. But one way or the other, I think Looney looks fine. The biggest concern is just that if he does come off the bench, what if he loses a few minutes because Golden State goes small against like Jabari Smith at center? That would be the biggest concern from a playing time standpoint. But I think most likely you're getting like 18 to 20 minutes or so if Looney comes off the bench, and then like 22 to 24 if he starts. At 4K, he's going to look like a decent value anyway. He just does become a little bit riskier if he comes off the bench. I don't think Şengün necessarily has much of an impact there. Like obviously they would like to go to Looney to defend him, but like you also have Draymond. So I don't know if they'll start Looney or not. That's kind of the bigger factor than whether or not Şengün is in. So really interesting 4-game slate. Obviously a lot of news that we are waiting on that can change things up. But that's what I have for you on this one. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel so you get notifications when these shows go live. Subscribe to Endgame Syndicate, and I'll be back at the same time, 4:45 tomorrow, to talk about tomorrow night's 3-gamer. Good luck on your lineups tonight. I'll see you back here tomorrow.